All right, hello math fans. We are going to talk today about the product and quotient theorems for polar form. Okay, so we already learned about polar form in day 2, and now we're going to multiply them together and we're going to divide them. So let's talk about the product first. So this is the product theorem. All right, so even before we get into polar, let's talk about rectangular. Okay, and remember rectangular is a plus bi. Okay, so let's do a nice mellow one here. It's 2 plus I root 5 times 3 root 5 minus 3i. Okay, you just got to be a little careful when you're multiplying it. And we're just going to do FOIL. So we get 2 times 3 root 5 is 6 root 5 minus 6i plus 3i, and then it's root 5 times root 5 is just times 5. And then last is minus 3i squared root 5. Okay, so we can do a couple simplifying things here. Of course, our I squared is negative 1. So 6 root 5 minus 6i, and this is plus 15i, and that's, since that's negative 1, it's going to be plus 3 root 5. And then we combine our like terms together, so you get 9 root 5 plus 9i. Okay, and again, it's in standard form, a plus bi. Make sure you put your real part first and your imaginary part second, and you got your answer. Okay, so that's pretty easy for rectangular form. Okay, now math fans, what we're going to do is we're going to do multiplication in polar form, and it's a little more difficult, but let me just give you, so this is product theorem now in polar. So the general form is R1, that's your first radius, times cosine theta 1 plus I sine of theta 1 times R2 times cosine of theta 2 plus I sine of theta 2. Alright, it's actually pretty easy. What we're going to do is we're just going to multiply the r's together. So we have R1 times R2, and then what we're going to do is we're going to add the thetas together. So it's going to be cosine, in fact, I'm going to change this into a bracket here because we're going to use parentheses. Okay, cosine of theta 1 plus theta 2, and that's going to be plus I sine of theta 1 plus theta 2. That's all it is. So this is the deal here, is you are multiplying the r's together and you're adding the angles together. So you multiply r's together, and you add the thetas together. Okay, it's pretty simple. So let's just kind of start out with a really basic problem here. If I give you, so here's your example. If I give you 4 times cosine of 30 degrees plus I sine of 30 degrees times 2 cosine of 60 degrees plus I sine of 60 degrees. Basically what we're going to do is we're going to say 4 times 2 is 8, and then it's going to be cosine of, I'll show a little work here, 30 plus 60 plus I sine of 30 plus 60. Okay, so we're just adding the angles together, and I multiplied those radii together. And so we have 8 times cosine of 90 degrees plus I sine of 90 degrees. Now this is really important, math fans. This is polar form, sometimes also referred to as trig form. Okay? If I want to convert, sometimes I'm going to ask you to give it to me in polar form. Sometimes I'm going to ask you to give it to me in rectangular form or standard form. Okay, just another way of saying that. And basically what rectangular form is you find the cosine of 90 and you find the sine of 90 and multiply that times and you distribute that 8. That's all you do. Because remember, rectangular form is A plus BI. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to say it's 8 times cosine of 90 is 0. Sine of 90 is 1. So 0 plus 1i, or 0 plus I. And then I distribute, well, of course, the 0 is 0, and my answer for this problem is just 8i. That is rectangular form. Okay? It's pretty easy, but you got to remember that. Polar form has cosines and sines. Rectangular form has no cosines and sines. It just has two different numbers. Okay? In this case here, obviously, the real value is 0. The imaginary part is 8i. All right, so that is that's just one example here. Okay, so let's do another example. All right, if I have 8 cosine of 210 plus I sine of 210 times 2 cosine of 330 plus I sine of 330. Okay, no big deal. Again, it's multiplication, so it's 8 times 2 is 16 times cosine, and it's 210 plus 330 is 540 plus I sine of 540. All right, that's, if I'm asking you just for polar, you're almost there, and the reason you're almost there is because this value of theta really needs to be less than 360 degrees. Well, what do? Coterminal. That's pretty huge, people. Coterminal. So that's it. It's going to be 16 times, we're going to do 540. 540 minus 360 gives you 180. So it's cosine 180 plus I sine 180. Okay, and that is polar form. And then, of course, in standard form, or rectangular form, it's just going to be 16 cosine of 180 is negative 1. Sine of 180 is 0, so plus 0i. And I don't even need to write that 0i. My answer to this problem is negative 16. That is rectangular form. Okay, pretty easy. Let's do one more example here for product. If I have 4, let's just write it this way, 4 cis 30 times 5 cis 120. Well, actually, as opposed to, we can, I mean, it's good to expand it because we're going to have to anyway, but really when you think about it, it's just 4 times 5 is 20, and you add the angles, cis 150. Oops, 50. And there you go. That's polar form. And if I need to write that out, to write it in rectangular, I think it's easy to do that. Cosine 150 plus I sine of 150. Okay, so if you hopefully remember how to do that, right? You're in this quadrant over here, so your cosine is going to be negative, your sine is going to be positive, your reference angle is 30 degrees. So the cosine at 30 is root 3 over 2, and of course it's negative because all students take calculus, and cosine's negative there. Sine of 30 is 1/2, it's positive, so it's plus 1/2 I. Okay, and then now you have to distribute. Now this one you're going to get a little bit more of an answer here, but 20, well, I'll show all my work here. Negative 20 root 3 over 2 plus 20 over 2I. Okay, and then just simplify. So it's negative 10 root 3 plus 10I. Okay, so this is rectangular form, and this guy up here was polar form. All right, so that's it for product. Okay, so let's do the quotient property. All right, this is got some similar characteristics, which you'll see. But let's actually talk about it. It's R1 times cosine, we'll put this in brackets here, cosine of theta 1 plus I sine of theta 1 divided by R2 times cosine of theta 2 plus I sine of theta 2. Okay, it's very simple. Again, the r's, just like in the product property, you multiply them. Now in the r's, we're going to divide them. So we're going to keep it as r1 divided by r2, and that's going to be times cosine, and what we're going to do is we're going to subtract, and you subtract the top minus the bottom. So cosine of theta 1 minus theta 2 plus I sine of theta 1 minus theta 2. Okay, that's it. Pretty straightforward. Okay, so let's try a nice little friendly example here. If I have 8 times cosine of 120 plus I sine of 120 over 2 times cosine of 30 plus I sine of 30. Okay, very simple. It's going to be 8 over 2, which is 4. And 120 minus 30 is 90. So it's 4 cosine of 90 plus I sine of 90. Okay, again, this is polar form. Okay, rectangular form just means you figure out what cosine and sine of 90 are, and you distribute that 4. So cosine of 90 is 0, sine of 90 is 1, plus I, 1I, right? And then 4 times 0 is 0, 4 times I is I, versus 4I, so the answer is 4I. Very straightforward. Okay, so let's try another example here. 3 cis 305 over 9 cis 65 degrees. Okay, so we're just going to do 3 over 9, and then it's going to be cis, it's 305 minus 65, which is 240, and you can simplify that as 1/3 cis 240. Okay, and there we go, that's polar form. Rectangular form, just let's kind of write it out here. It's 1/3 times cosine of 240 plus I sine of 240. And if you remember here, 240 is down here. And the reference angle is 60 degrees. And their sine and cosine are both negative here, so it's 1/3 times cosine of 60, so it's negative, and it's going to be negative 1/2. Sine of 60 is root 3 over 2, so it's minus I root 3 over 2. Don't forget that I. You distribute the 1/3, so we get negative 1/6 minus I root 3 over 6. And that is your rectangular form. Okay, it's pretty easy stuff. Of course, just using your calculator, if you had, just real quickly, if I told you 4 cis 19.25 degrees, and that times 7 cis 41.75 degrees. Okay, that'd be brutal. Now, it'd be actually, it's easy in polar. It's just 28 cis 61 degrees. That's really easy. That's polar. So, of course, if you don't have a calculator, if I'm not going to let you guys use a calculator, you'd be done, and I would just ask you for the polar form. Now, if I ask you for the rectangular form, you're just going to type in your calculator. So it's 28 times cosine 61 degrees plus I sine of 61 degrees. And you multiply all that out, and you get 13.57 plus 24.49 I. That's it with your calculator. Okay? So that's really it for the multiplication and the quotient property. The next lesson is going to be using powers. All right? That's it, math fans. Have a good day. Goodbye.